I am a little late, but I will say on my walk from my subway to the studio, I was calling my senators and my representative
Yeah, you
because
were.
you know what I did actually? That is really smart, not to toot my own horn, but I went through the files and saved the numbers, but then added the script as the note in their contact
Yes.
because so often I have the time to call. I always like have a few minutes and but then I'm like, "Shit, I have to remember the exact right verbiage, and I don't remember what the, like, legislation name is other
Totally.
than the Go Safe Act." So I added it in my note, and it just made it so easy.
That's like a ultimate hack
Ultimate hack.
for
So,
sure.
Kitty, welcome to the show.
Thank
I'm
you.
so happy to have you. This is so long coming.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this for, like, a year now. Um, but I wanna start by first telling you I know I say this to you, but I mean it, like, how wildly impressed I am by you. Of your no, I'm so serious. Take it. Take the compliment. Of your tenacity and your drive and your ability to really, like, show up and put your money where your mouth is, because so many of us say we wanna see change and, we're sick of this and when is enough enough? And I think that one of the problems is we all feel helpless,
Yeah.
but you really took that emotion and turned it into something. So,
Well, thank
I'm
you.
honored to know you and call you a friend.
Thank you. But right back at you. I think
Oh,
we
thank
all
you.
channel our, anxiety and whatever else into something. And I think I'm so lucky to be surrounded by so many people that just like validate like this makes sense, and like we can
Yep.
do this together. And you kind of like find your people and you're one of them and you kind of are like, yeah, this we can do this.
Well, we can do it, and I think that that is why I love these trips and spending so much time with you and doing this work because I will say I always leave feeling hopeful for change and really feeling like change is going to be made. So, to start off, I would love if you could explain what led you to starting March 4th and how that actually happened.
Yes. So it was never part of the plan. It was completely by accident. But I always say, like, I was 25 when Sandy Hook happened.
Mhm.
And I think everyone remembers that moment in history and how horrible it was. But I just assumed naively and selfishly that the adults in the room would figure it out by the time it impacted me. And that's like a super selfish take. But like as a 25-year-old, I'm like, it felt so far off. Like, how horrific. And surely something will come of this. Um, and so, I kind of stayed uh, a step back from advocacy, just assuming like I wasn't smart enough. I didn't really understand legislation. I didn't understand politics. Like I kind of stayed in my lane, right? Like I was in sales. I went to the University of Iowa, and while it's an awesome, fun school, we're not known for like pumping out policy wonks and scholars. So I was just like, look, I know my lane, and I'll cheer people on, and I'll donate, and I'll do the things that I can do. But it's above me. And then Uvalde happened, and I was sending my oldest. That was in May, and I was sending my oldest to kindergarten that September. And so I realized, obviously, that shook all of us to the core, and especially the way that it unfolded and all of the missteps along the way. But I just
Mhm.
realized I was sending my kid to a mass shooting target in elementary school because I had to educate her. And I'm like, this can't be right. Like this doesn't make sense. And we my husband and I went to the French Open, like the tennis tournament
Yep.
in France, after Uvalde, and it's all I could talk about. But I think that that melting pot of people from across the world, who this was, global news, Uvalde, and everyone was talking about it. But this really planted a seed because every parent and person that I talked to from every different country all said the same thing. They were like, we're so sorry. And also, we'll never understand what you guys do over there. Like, we don't have access to guns. We don't have access to assault weapons, obviously. And we just don't get it. And we're all
What a
sitting,
gift.
right. We're all sitting here in America, like, yeah, we know this is an American problem. But then leaving the bubble, you're like, what in God's name are we doing? Like, this makes no sense. And so then about a month later, it was the 4th of July, and my kids had never been to a parade because of COVID. So I, like, got their little embroidery flagged outfits like 3 months in advance, was so excited. And we're at our parade in our little town, and we start getting messages from friends that they're running from an active shooter. And there was a mass shooting a town over from us at the parade next to the neighborhood to the north. And at first you're like, no, it must be something
Right.
else. And then we had to shelter in place because there was a man at large with an AR-15 on the 4th of July. So it's, 10:30 a.m. on the 4th. And my husband and I are like in tears watching this unfold on TV, getting text messages. There was a 2-year-old who is now orphaned, who was separated from his parents, which at the time I was like, oh, it's probably very chaotic. They were separated. But no, his parents were murdered protecting him. And it was the worst day. And my kids, I remember they were little. I had a 5-year-old and twin 2-year-olds at the time. And my 5-year-old was like, why can't we go outside? It's the 4th of July. And we have like the windows, and I'm in my head, I'm like, it's because I'm raising you here. Like, it's because I'm raising you in America. That's why. Um,
Mhm.
so I think I was very, very depressed, and there's a lot of despair that first 24 hours, and just how could this happen? And sorrow, and this community was completely torn apart. And then I just got pissed. And anyone that knows me knows I can get spicy kind of
I
quickly.
love
And
it about you.
so I was spicy, and I'm like, look, I know I'm not the first person to like ask questions about this, and I'm not going to be the last, but like, can someone explain to me why someone needs an AR-15? Like, what am I missing? And this echo chamber of Instagram was like, well, technically no one needs it. Like, you don't need it. You can't really even hunt with it because you can't eat the animal you shoot because it explodes. So I'm like, okay, why can't the president just ban assault weapons? And it's like, well, okay, because we're not a dictatorship. I'm like, fine. Does Congress really work in the summer? And that answer is kind of, because do they work at all? Like, that's a long, long conversation for another time. So I just ended that my kind of rant online of just like, okay, I know that I can't sit here and do nothing. So it's July 5th. I think I want to go to DC and scream at the top of my lungs that I want a federal ban on assault weapons. Let me know if you want to come. Here's my email address. And then I took a dose of Xanax, went to bed. And then for the first time in the morning, I was crying tears of like hope because I had like over 300 emails, people all across the country that are saying like, I'm in event planning, I can help you. Oh, I'm in DC, I can help you set meetings. I'm in PR, I can help you. And all of a sudden on July 6th, March 4th was formed. We literally like had to put a name on the permit for DC. And they're like, what do you want to call this? I'm like, I don't know, And well, it's a march. It was going to be a march on the Capitol Hill, and it's after the 4th, and it's like a forward motion. So that's as much thought as we gave it. And then it was formed.
But that's what I mean in the sense of so inspiring because so many of us feel that exact way, and it does feel like an echo chamber. Like, how many fucking times can we sit back and watch specifically children get shot up in a school, a parade, a park, and be offered thoughts and prayers
Mm-hmm.
and, "We're thinking of you," and no actual action taken?
Yeah.
And then just wait around for the next one because the scary reality is that there always is a next one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you brought up Sandy Hook. That was such a turning point for so many because I think all of us who watched that happen thought, well, now something must be done. It's children.
Right.
This has to be the driving change. And it wasn't.
Right.
And that was what, again, I was very young. I was nowhere near having children, but I do even remember myself in that time of life thinking, if not now,
Right.
when is this going to change? And what I love so much about the work that you and March 4th are doing specifically is, look, our world is intensely divided right now, intensely divided.
Mhm.
And I see that on social media every day. I see it in my DMs. I see it walking around the city. However, I truly believe that this is one thing majority of our country can get behind, because nobody wants these shootings to be happening.
Right.
And that's why I love that you guys are focused on the nonpartisan aspect of, we're not aligning ourselves with a political party. We're not even trying to take away the Second Amendment. Like, and I want to get into this because I know that there's so many organizations that are working on gun reform
Yeah.
and like strict gun policies and all of that, which gets a lot of pushback from gun owners, and there's always arguments. But you took this one low hanging fruit and you were like, I'm going to solely focus on this because I think it is actually feasible if we get enough eyes on it. And like you said, no one fucking needs an AR-15.
Right. Right.
Like,
So we're like this very small puzzle piece of this broader puzzle. Like the reality is, and it's gross, mass shootings are between 1% and 3% of all gun violence in America. Like that's insane. We can't, it doesn't
insane.
even make sense. It doesn't, you can't even really comprehend that statistic. And so I think, you know, to look at this overall problem, and as someone with like ADHD, I'm like, oh God, this is super overwhelming. It's like a big pile of laundry. Like, I'm just going to ignore it. I don't, it's so big. How can we possibly chip away at it? But if, like anything, you take one piece that you can do at a time, like, well, first I'm going to do this. First I'm going to do this. And it's not to say that all of these other laws and causes aren't important. They are. We need all of the groups doing all of the things and shaking this tree at all of the angles, because we don't know what's going to happen first. We don't know how it's going to happen.
Right.
And anyone that says they do is wrong. They don't know. We are all doing this for the first time today, right? Like, we are all living this together. But I took this and just said, hey, I am somebody that's not well versed in policy. Now, luckily, my co president very much is and has spent 20 years in lobbying and politics. So she translates for me. But to say, I think there's this element of tempered radicalism, which means if you go out there and you say, we have to get all the guns need to go away, right? That's a very hard sell. And
Very hard.
for
And you're going to
someone,
lose a lot of people.
correct. And for someone that spent my career in sales, like, you have to pick something and negotiate and get people to the middle, right? And so if you go to a broad population, many of whom in America are gun owners, and you say, I want to take away your guns, it's a non-starter. But if you
Mm.
look at this, it sounds like I really thought this through. I didn't. I just looked at this and said, why does anyone need an AR-15? These weapons, I mean, the families in Uvalde, many of whom had to submit their DNA samples to identify their children because of what these weapons do. That should be the only sentence you need to know. Why do we need a weapon that creates cavities in the body that doctors say, I cannot recreate an organ? I cannot save people that way. These aren't guns. These are weapons of war. And then the big piece that I think is the anchor in our work is that we already had this law. And
Right. And I
I
want to
didn't
get
know
into
that.
that. I
Yes.
sure as hell didn't know that. So this law was in place from 94 to 2004.
Yeah, girl.
I tried. Well, after our first trip to DC, I really tried to retain as much information as I could, because there was that one office where you were like, all right, do you want to do it? And I was like, oh my God, fuck.
And you did it.
And I froze up, but then I
Oh, you
did
did
go
it.
in and I did it. And now I feel like I could do it
Totally.
20 times over. But what, it was in place.
Mhm.
We saw a decrease in mass casualties by 70%. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Girl.
What?
She's not even
I
reading
try.
from like anything.
No, it's actually astonishing because I can't remember facts, but those are ingrained in my brain. Why did this, what's the correct term?
Expire.
Bill,
Law.
legislation, law expire?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
So, like anything,
And
there's
sorry,
like,
just one other question.
mhm.
What was the law
Yeah.
that there was yeah, like, get into that.
Okay, so I think context is super important, and I've had to learn a lot about this as you have too. So basically, in 1994, there was a crime bill that was passed in a bipartisan manner, and what that means is that both Republicans and Democrats voted yes to get it passed. Most monumental legislation that gets passed has to be done by having a population of both parties doing so. And in this law, included, or in this bill, included an assault weapons ban. And what that meant was there was no more sale or manufacture of assault weapons for civilians. So it was part of a bigger law. In order to get it passed, they included a sunset clause. And that, as my co president has explained to me, is actually a very common way that laws are written to get things passed, because it's not like, oh, it's forever. You know, it's like, well,
Okay.
every 10 years we'll vote on it and to reinstate it every, whatever the time frame is.
Mhm.
So instead of voting on it and not passing it, they just didn't vote on it in 2004. Now, this was,
Purposely, or I mean, was Bush president?
yeah, but it's not the
'Cause yeah,
president, it's Congress that does it,
okay.
right? And what's interesting is this is a post 9/11 America, okay? This
Mhm.
is a pre mass shooting America. So, I think if we're being generous, we can say, well, what's the worst that can happen? Um,
Yeah.
if, there's plenty of other, kind of dovetails you can do about this. But the bottom line is we have this law. The data tells us the only benefit of its expiration is that we have data to tell us what happened
Yeah.
during this time. And you were 70% less likely to die in a mass shooting. As soon as this law expired, and you look at charts and graphs, and you don't need to be, a statistician to understand, mass shootings go up and they continue to climb. Then you have other ingredients like the mass marketing of assault weapons to a population of Americans. And they do a phenomenal job at marketing these weapons. And go ahead.
No, I'm blown the fuck away because, like, I just cannot understand why anyone would think they would need one of these.
And I think every few years that passed, and these things would happen, but then you had a stronghold, another piece of context in organizations like the NRA, which was a very well-funded lobbying group. And they're well funded because the profits of the guns help fund the lobbyists, who then help the manufacturers sell more. So it's this
Mhm.
lovely circle. So I think, to look at this law, taking all of the like nuances and really detail away from a layman's terms, we had a law that we agreed made sense. It expired, and then we started to see mass casualty events at a level we'd never seen, to the point that now, 20 years later, this month,
Mhm.
it's normal. It's normal to have mass shooting headlines. Nowhere else, literally, except where we drew, our little country.
Yep.
And we have for 20 years tried to say it's anything but the guns. And what we are saying at March 4th is like two things can be true. We have a mental health crisis in this country. Absolutely. And you want to know what's contributing to that? The mass shooting epidemic.
Yep.
But if you remove legal access to assault weapons, because the sentence that strings the deadliest mass shootings together is the shooter obtained the AR-15 legally. If we could mitigate that, then we should. It is not going to solve every mass shooting. It is not going to solve gun violence, but less people will die. So let's start with the low hanging fruit.
And I think that's what it is. Like, so many people, I'll have a few discourse in my DMs when I talk about this, not a ton, which I'm grateful for, but some. And some people will be like, but it's a mental health crisis, or, but they're going to find a way to the weapon. I'm not saying, and you're not saying, this is going to fix everything. But if they can have one more roadblock to potentially get that weapon, why would we not put it in place? Like, that's what doesn't make sense to me. Why not better our odds?
Right.
And I think what also helps, which I know you talk about with the data from the 10 years that it was in place is it proves no one's coming for your we're not trying to take away your Second Amendment.
Right.
That's not what the focus of March 4th is. That's not what the focus of this ban is.
Right.
And, I'll get that response sometimes being like, "Well, if I see someone with a gun in a Walmart, I feel safer." I can't compute that thought because I've never ever in my life felt that way.
Right.
But if you feel that way and you feel that that person is somehow going to save you from this mass shooting, wouldn't it also help you feel safer if someone just couldn't access an AR-15?
Right. I mean, I think I'm really glad you brought that up because you have to meet people where they're at. And like
Right.
everybody comes to their conclusions based on their own experiences. I've had to learn a lot about other people's experiences, gun owners, hunters, all this stuff. And they're not innate, no one's a bad person saying, like, no, but I really want kids to die in schools. Like,
Right.
Americans don't want that to happen. What there's like, for example, there's a Montana, I believe. I was meeting with an office there, and they're like, it takes, at least 45 minutes from a 911 call to dispatch just because of how rural and how long, so people
Mhm.
want to protect themselves. And like, got it. Like, you may not understand that in New York. I may not understand that in Chicago, but that's some people's realities. And we are saying the Second Amendment is sound, right? That is sound. It is not unlimited. And
Mhm.
the access to assault weapons doesn't mean if we remove that, it doesn't mean you can't defend yourself. There is a plethora of weapons that are being manufactured on the daily because of this country's culture with guns. I think what's really interesting is to listen to veterans on this
Yep.
issue who have handled these weapons and the training and the behavioral assessments and all the things they have to go through just to handle such a weapon in combat. And here we simply ask someone for a credit card and say, have a nice day. And then
Or
the
give
other,
them to a child who has a history for a
right,
Christmas present.
right, right,
Yeah.
which thank goodness we're prosecuting that now. Um,
Yeah.
so veterans, law enforcement who are outgunned. Look at the Uvalde example of how
Mhm.
many cops were. They're not afraid of a 5'4" boy. They were afraid of the weapon. And
Right.
then also doctors. So these three populations I think are really interesting because doctors see it. And we've brought doctors to the Hill to explain to Congress, like, hey, we cannot prevent this. You can. We cannot save a
Mhm.
child hit by an AR-15 because I can't recreate an organ. You can prevent the access to these weapons so that I have a fighting chance to save someone from,
Right.
a gunshot wound because those are different. So I think it's like context is important, people's experiences are important, but our goal is just to unify. This is not about politics. This is not about which side and what you think on all these things. It's just logic. Let's remove
Mhm.
access to weapons that were made for war. Let's reserve those for war. This is not a hot take.
No, and I think you brought up the mental health aspect of everything, and yes, that's an argument of some people, and I'm not discrediting the fact that many of these people are struggling with their mental health who are going forward with these mass shootings, and at the same time, the duality is that I wish they did not have access to a gun, and I'm curious if you can shed more light on the mental health impact we're seeing
Yeah.
on the result of mass casualties because, recently on our DC trip, there were a handful of survivors with us and some family members of those who did not survive recent shootings. And to see the impact on them, whether it's the person who survived who is still deeply struggling, or, we heard from one parent from whose child was a survivor, and she was just begging them, like, "Don't forget him
Hmm.
because he survived. I don't want his name to just be forgotten as we move on to the next one." Like, he's still deeply struggling.
Yeah.
And hearing from Jackie's family who they lost in Uvalde, like, there is such a negative ripple
Yes.
effect
Yes.
that I don't think has gotten enough attention.
No. And
Or even just these poor children who haven't experienced a mass shooting, but they're doing lockdown drills.
I think the reason there hasn't been enough attention is because we're in constant trauma. Like
Yeah.
we are going from headline to headline. And I'm saying we as people that haven't directly been impacted yet.
Mhm.
You're 100% right. And I like to bring this up in my meetings in Congress because, again, it's not about, well, it's a mental health issue, so let's not legislate guns. The answer is yes, there's a mental health issue, and access to
Right.
guns should be limited as with with the survivor, with any headline, you focus on how many dead, how many injured. And in no way, shape, or form does that give you any sort of insight into how deeply the entire
Mhm.
community has been impacted. I remember the first time we went to DC, which was a week after March 4th started, and we had survivors from Highland Park and survivors from Uvalde, and they were together and listening to the stories. And, you know, the there were parents who brought their surviving children from Uvalde. And I remember Oscar looking at me and saying, "This is not, just so we're clear, like my son survived, but this is not my son.
Right.
Like the things that he saw, the things that he witnessed, the trauma he just endured, like two different kids."
There's no way to process that as
No.
anyone, let alone a
No,
child.
think about all the PTSD veterans have. Like we are
Right.
raising a generation of trauma. And to your point, so that's talking about people who were there, right? Then talk about the siblings and talk about siblings who have lost, that the bedrooms are still intact, because how do you even handle that? Talk about the
Mhm.
family members. We know the aunt and uncle, of a few of the folks who did not survive, and just their days. And these are insane ripples. And then think about law enforcement, teachers, etc., and neighboring communities that then need to go to work the next day and everything's fine. Think about parents like us who have to talk to their
Mhm.
children and tell them, well, it's not going to happen to you. We don't know that.
Right.
And
I
the
think that's what made it so real for me is my son was out of school sick. He's in a twos program. The day that we were doing like a practice lockdown, and so the teacher sent an email of like kind of what they went over, and my mom happened to be with me. It was right after he had a surgery and she was helping out, and she was sitting on the couch and I was like, "Buddy, I need you to really listen to me, okay? Like this is really important. I wanna explain something to you." And I'm literally tearing up explaining this, but I just remember looking at him being like, "If the teachers say there's an emergency, we are doing XYZ, their process, you need to be quiet. You need to listen. You need to understand you cannot yell, you cannot laugh, you cannot be making jokes. Silence." And my mom is just watching this because we didn't have those
right.
conversations growing up. This wasn't a thing. And watching her watch me do this, I almost had this out of body experience of like, how fucked up
Mm-hmm.
is this country
Mm-hmm.
that I'm explaining to a fucking 3-year-old how to respond to someone coming into his school with a gun.
Very
And
fucked up.
he has there's no way he's taking in any of this information.
Nope.
There's no way he's gonna know what to do. You try getting a 3-year-old to be quiet. You
Exactly.
can't. Like, it and that was also the realization of, like, I feel helpless. I feel
Yes.
completely helpless because I can't ever explain to him how to act because I wouldn't even know how to act, and no matter what, he's 3. He's not gonna do what he's supposed to do.
Right. And it doesn't get better as the kids get older,
I'm sure
you
it probably
know,
just gets worse.
and like I talk with friends that have, high schoolers, and it's just, they're like, last night they were plotting. I guess the son asked her, what do I do if I'm in the bathroom? And she's like, I'm literally going through, like, okay, well, first I would check this, then I would do this. And like, there's the out of body experience of like, what is
Mhm.
this conversation? Like,
No.
and that's where, as parents, like, you can feel helpless, but you can also channel your frustration and anger. Like, our neighbors to the north in Canada, their kids don't do these drills. They don't
Right.
even know. I was meeting with a Canadian mother who was like, what are those things you guys do? What are they called? Like those things, the drills you practice. I'm like, oh, lockdown drills. You don't even do them. Like, this isn't
Right.
about geography. Like, this is a
Right, like,
choice.
we're not doing a tornado drill, like,
Mm,
I didn't grow up with those, other people did,
I
it's
did.
different. This is a fucking choice. So, on that note, I get messages constantly when I post about work that we're doing together and when I volunteer of like, how do I get involved? What do I do?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel so helpless as a mom who's terrified or a non-parent, whatever it is. Like, what are 1, 2, 3 action items for listeners right now
Mhm.
to actually help with this and make it hopefully an actual law to
Yeah.
bring it back?
First, I'm going to explain the hope piece because I think that gives
Yeah.
context into like what I'm telling you is real, right? Like, who am I?
Yes.
So, just for quick context, March 4th started July of 2022. We went to the Hill with 600 people the 12th and 13th of July of 22. We asked for a vote on this. The leader of the House at the time said yes. This had not been voted on. The assault weapons ban had not been voted on for 28 years. So it wasn't like, oh, it keeps failing. People keep doing no. They just didn't do it. And so 2 weeks after we were there, not only did it get voted on, it was passed through the House for the first time in almost 30 years. That is a huge moment of progress.
Huge, but can you explain, sorry, as
Yes.
someone who's, like, illiterate in politics,
Nope. Yep.
when you say pass through the House,
Yep. So
what does that mean?
it's like going, I'm just a bill, which I don't remember that. So there's the House and there's the Senate, and these are two chambers of Congress, and these are the people that pass laws. A bill has to go through both chambers in either order before it gets to the president's desk to sign it.
Okay.
So this bill had been dead in the water for almost 30 years. And it is as simple as everyone paying attention, everyone getting pissed and saying, do something about this, and going and making the calls and having this uprising. And then magically that bill comes out from underneath the pile and lands on the top. Like,
Mhm.
that's how this works. So
Okay.
that's step one. Then the Senate decided not to vote on it. And so that measure died. Every 2 years, the bills kind of start over because
Okay.
every 2 years, representatives are newly elected. So that's one piece of context. The second one is, as of November of 23, a second assault weapons ban bill was introduced into Congress. For the first time in American history, we have two bills that can do the same thing. That is another big piece of progress. And so
Yeah.
if you ever feel like, gosh, nothing's happening, like, I promise it is. I promise it is, and you can be a part of it. And so, to give you an answer to your question, long winded, the best kind of participation is the kind you'll do. So if that is following us on Instagram so that you're at least aware of what the latest news is, who's, the latest co-sponsors, and I can explain that. Great. That is a small step. Awesome. If you can make your 3 calls every day, great. Those 3 calls would be 1 representative and 2 senators. Everybody has 1 House of Representatives representative and 2 senators. This is federal legislation. So there's state senators and there's local legislation. This is all for federal. These are the laws that would pass for the entire country. So if you make your calls every day, you are helping add noise to this issue. You can be sure that there are gun advocates who are making their calls. So at the very least, cancel their calls out. That
Mhm.
is one thing you can do. It takes maybe 5 minutes, depending on if you get a human or a voicemail. We have
Yeah, I got 2
scripts.
voicemails this morning for
Right.
my senators, and it took 2 minutes,
Yep.
and then I got someone for my representative, and it took another 2 minutes.
Yep. And no one's going to quiz you on legislation. Nobody's going to ask you anything other than, what's your zip code? What's your
Yeah,
comment? Thank you so much. I get
but
DMs
it
all the
does
time.
matter.
Yes.
Because
Okay.
when you say that, I think it feels like, "Oh, are they even listening?"
Yeah.
But it does matter. It makes a difference.
There are,
And I
and
just wanna rewind for one
yep.
hot second. What you're calling and asking for is them to co-sign this new legislation, the Go Safe Act,
So
which would reinstate the federal ban on assault weapons.
yes, to make it really simple, and we have scripts on our Instagram and on our website and all of that.
It's a
But
highlight, quick calls,
yes, daily calls. To make it really
daily calls.
simple, your goal is to call your 3 elected officials and say, I want you to pass an assault weapons ban. Okay, that's what you're asking. You want them to do something. Whether they've co-sponsored or not on a specific bill is kind of a deeper piece. All the word co-sponsor is just a public vote of support. saying,
So, like, if it actually got to the vote, they would vote
they
yes.
are a hard yes. So some people may not
Okay.
co-sponsor out the gate, etc. But the bottom line is, even if your senator or your representative does co-sponsor already, so they already are in support of it, you still call, because guess what?
Okay.
Co-sponsoring is not enough. I want my senator talking to people across the aisle about this bill. I want them rallying and whipping votes. I want them doing something to get this to the floor, not just saying,
Yeah.
I support it.
And when are these votes happening?
They happen whenever the Congress decides they do, which can be at any time. A fun story I like to tell is that the TikTok ban was a bipartisan vote that happened out of thin air because they decided it mattered. They can do
Mm.
it at any
That's
time.
so fucking
It's
insane.
so insane, but that's why it's like your
Okay.
calls matter, because if they don't hear from you, it doesn't, that tells them that this issue isn't top of mind.
Right. And to be clear, we're still waiting for both votes?
So for this session of Congress, correct.
Okay.
This session of Congress ends with the year. And so there is a new session of Congress in 25.
Okay.
So there are people that are like, well, when the election happens, sure. But what we're saying is there is nothing stopping current Congress from voting on this right now. Zero. So let's put pressure on them. There's so many laws that need to be passed, and what we're trying to do is take one that we know 67% of America supports. We can't get 67% of America to like agree on a topping for pizza. So that's a huge deal. When the marriage equality passed, there was a 61% in favor polling in America. 61. So on paper, we should be good with this law, and that's why we're focusing on pushing that momentum and just getting it done.
All right. Well, A, I feel like this was so informative, but B, as always, I'm continuously inspired by you, and like you just lit a fire under people's asses, and I love watching it. No, truly, like I love watching you get spicy and worked up. It's one of my favorite things. Um,
Uh,
I obviously want to continue to encourage everyone to be making their calls. And I also will say, and you talk about this a lot, like, don't wait for the next mass shooting.
yeah.
There will be one. Don't wait. Your activism does not need to wait for the next one. You can start now.
Yep.
Like, start making your calls. Light the fire under your representatives' asses, because it doesn't I feel like we've become so numb to
Yeah.
the news, and I hate that. Personally, I see a headline, I'm
You
sad
have
about it,
to,
I text my friends, and then we move on the next
because you
day.
have to for self-preservation. Like, don't
True,
feel
and that's
guilty.
even more sad.
Yeah.
But I think that we so often watch it happen, we all see then 10,000 Instagrams, "What should we do? How do we stop this?" Blah, blah, blah. The next day, back to crickets until the next one happens,
Mhm.
and, like, this is something that you can actively do every single week, every single fucking day.
Mhm.
Whatever, like, anytime you have 5 minutes, because I really do feel, especially working with you, but hearing the White House Office for Gun Violence Prevention, when I
Mhm.
hear them speak, there's hope, and I
Yes.
do believe there's change to be made.
Yes.
I wanna close by a new segment we're bringing to the show called Filling My Cup,
Ooh.
because I am such a proponent of filling your cup before you fill others. My whole Substack is focused on it. I talk about it all the time, especially as a mother. So I wanna know, how do you fill your cup?
Ooh. Okay, love that. I'm a big like
Thanks.
mental health person, and it's like put on
Yeah,
your oxygen mask first. So
you have to.
Um, so it's like time with kids and being really present, which means like I put my phone upside down, and no,
Mhm.
I'm not perfect. It's around me plenty. Don't worry. But that time with kids like really fills me up. And then my husband and I have been playing Scrabble a lot lately. We love
So
it.
fun.
It's like
So fun.
so fun, and it's just like something different, and you like use your brain and you like make fun of each other
Mhm.
for making up words, and it's like so fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
We played, oh my god, I cannot remember the name. Joe plays it with his grandma. It's like a numbers thing, and it looks like Scrabble, because you
Oh,
have a board with numbers and you have to, like, okay,
I
you
don't
know
know it.
what? I'll put it, I cannot remember the name, but it's fun to do something like that where it fully takes you out of the
Yes.
everyday, the talking with your partner about the logistics of life and
Right.
your children. and you're engaged versus, like, sitting on the couch watching TV.
Totally, which we love a good show, but like, what fills your cup?
Um, for me, it's my mornings alone, quite honestly. Like, I need that time to myself. My alarm goes off at, like, 5:30, so I have, like, an hour to an hour and a half by myself to do whatever it is I please.
Mhm.
Time with my kids where I'm present, 100%. Again, like, I'm working on spending more time with my husband, but, like, we're in a very crazy
Yeah,
season of life, as everyone is, but with
totally.
a baby, it's just chaos. Those things honestly, my girlfriends, like,
Yeah.
I realized my friends are such a vital fucking part of my life.
Yes.
When are you filling your cup? Like, how often? Are you specific about it? Are you implementing, like, this time
Yeah.
window for yourself?
Yeah, and like I'm a weekly therapy girl. Like so no matter
Mhm.
what, I have an hour, you know.
Same.
I like weave in Pilates. That's like an hour where my cuz I like have anxiety, ADHD, like there's no off button. And
Oh,
so
girl, that's why we get along
I
so well.
know. And so like when I'm doing Pilates, what I love about it is no matter what, it's like, oh, your form's wrong. Oh, now we're changing. Oh, we're going to do this. So like I don't have time to spiral. Just
No, you have to focus or you're falling off the machine.
yeah, yeah. Or you're like bending something that doesn't bend like that. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I love you so much. For everyone who
Back
wants
at you.
more of you, where can they best support you?
Follow us. It sounds so silly, but follow us on Instagram. March underscore fourth underscore FOURTH. And then our website is we march forth all words .org. I think it's again, it's just about you don't I'm not asking you to pay attention to this every day because it's heavy. We're going to do that for you, but when you can dip in and out of this, please do because it really really
Mhm.
matters.
And are you currently looking for more volunteers? Because I do feel
Always.
like there are members of my community who are like, "I wanna really get involved."
Girl,
And I
please.
guess could you explain what some of those opportunities would look like?
Yeah. So we have this amazing, just like tribe of volunteers from across the country. So whether you
They're
have
awesome.
graphic design skills or you have like internet sleuthing skills, which I feel like is every woman, you know, you're like, oh, I can find that person's ex girlfriend's brother from 2004. So
Yep.
we sometimes do that kind of stuff with like Congress people of like, okay, let's find out what they like and who might know them and back channels and all this stuff. There's like admin support of putting stuff in spreadsheets, helping people do events and getting them logos. Like there is so much to do, but I think the common thread is it's just people who it's everyone figures shit out. So it's like you may not do it, know how to do something, but you'll Google it and you'll figure it out.
And I also think connecting, like, if you have any type of I love connecting anyone, and that's
Well,
something
you're
with
the
you, I'm like,
best.
"Oh, this person, done, connect." Like, if you have even that to offer, everything is helpful.
Yeah.
For people who want to potentially volunteer, what is the best contact?
Head to our website, wemarchforth.org, and then there's a volunteer submission form.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Okay,
Thank you.
amazing. I love you. Thank you for
Love
everything you're
you.
doing.
Oh my gosh, thank you for amplifying and she's a real one, guys. She shows up, she walks the walk, she connects, and she's fun. And she's
Thank
pretty.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.